So thank you for coming to session 2A, which is on putting potential solutions into operations, startups, and local initiatives. I'm Selva Nadaraja. I'm an associate professor in the UIC College of Business, so UI Chicago. And I belong to a group called Information and Decision Sciences. So we're decision scientists that work on business problems, broadly defined. And my partner in crime is Julie Siddell, professor of geography and geographic information sciences at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And Julie's kindly agreed to serve as a scribe. So let me just put the session in context of what we've heard so far in the workshop. What do we mean by putting solutions into operation? So we heard our keynote speaker, Susan, who's at the back, who mentioned that we need a transformed system to achieve equitable transition of sustainable transportation systems. So that's like the end state. And in the morning, we heard from our plenary speaker that the transition to that end state also has to be designed, otherwise we won't reach equity. And the UIC chancellor made a call to us to put problem descriptions into problem solutions, sort of make the transformation. So in many ways, this session intends to start the conversation to do just that. And I cannot be happier than the panelists that we have here. We have 4 distinguished panelists, and they'll help us answer 4 key questions. So what are the role of startups and local initiatives in the transition towards sustainable transportation systems? What are important equity and accessibility questions that we need to address in order to make the transition? How do you address challenges and barriers, including financing, which Robert and I were just talking about before the session got going? And then on a more positive note, what are the innovations in technology and other areas that we foresee breaking these barriers? So we'll just get the conversation started in many ways, and we'll have 2 parts of the session. The first part, to create a baseline for our discussion, I've asked the panelists to speak for 12 minutes each, followed by a quick clarification question for 1 or 2 minutes. And then we'll open up for Q&A, where you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So without further ado, our first speaker is Robert Blake, the Executive Director of Native Sun Community Power Development. He's also owner of Solar Bear, pronounced Gizis Makwa. Gizis Makwa. Okay, and so it's a pleasure. The floor is yours, Robert. Let me make the speaker.
I think like everything that was asked like sort of falls into like everything that I've been doing. Like literally everything you said falls into what I'm doing. But I just want to paint real quick a little context of how all this got started and how it all began, right? Because some of you are entrepreneurial and you're going to go into this and like, how do I get going, Bob? You know what I mean? So, and how'd you do it? And so, I was protesting out in Standing Rock, like a lot of folks were, and then, bandanas and, sunglasses because you're getting, they're throwing mace up at you, stuff like that. And then we were protesting the Line 3. So we were protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline and then Line 3, right? The oil pipelines coming through our tribal territories. And then, I'm sitting there like helicopter coming down on us. And I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, there's got to be an easier way to do this. So I went on the Department of Energy website and I started looking for grants. And one of the things that I saw was an electric vehicle charging grant. And this was before the Justice 40. This was before all that, right? We got in on that. It was like I forgot what it was called, but we got in on that last thing. And since then now, this project has become a Justice 40 project for the DOE, Joint Office, DOT. And so, we put in the grant, and I thought to myself, okay, the fossil fuel companies are going to win. They're going to win the war, but they're not going to win the battle. I mean, they're going to win the battle, but they're not going to win the war. And so, started us down this line of this is just another form of native resistance to the fossil fuel infrastructure. We're going to create a Route 66, And just all these ideas start coming to my mind. And so anyways, on a Saturday night, I just start writing this thing up, and just stuff coming to my head. I'm just like, send this off to my partner in the Native Son, and she looked at it and she was like, "This is good." She's like, I gotta rewrite it. I rewrite some stuff here though, wordsmith it for you. She wordsmithed it for me, and sent it back to me, and I said, "This is good, Lisa. I got to wordsmith it though too." So I started going back on it. So kind of came down to this, and then I called up my buddy in Standing Rock, Joe McNeil, and I said, "Hey Joe," I said, "Man, would you want to partner up on this project with us? And it's just really going to show how tribal nations are standing up against the oil companies." "Yeah, man, let's do it." Boom, and so we did it, and consequently, Secretary Granholm and Vice President Harris made the announcement. We were the highest awarded grant in that period. Well, so this ain't supposed to happen because I got some feds here, but this ain't supposed to happen. But they came up to me. They came up to me at one of the events I was at out in D.C., and they said, "By the way, we're not supposed to tell you, but that was our favorite grant that we awarded. That was incredible. Bob, you got legendary status in the DOE with all this stuff." And so I was like, all right. So, we started to put that together. We got more, we got cost share from all these utility companies because they're like, "Hey, we want to be in on this, on this EV thing." Grist did a story on us. We start getting all this press, and it just started getting crazy. And then, then recently, right after that, Biden comes out with his plan in the State of the Union. Buttigieg comes out. They're talking about it. All the car companies are talking about it. And so they're all just like, "Yeah, let's go gung-ho on this." Well, then we got awarded Wisconsin and Michigan. And then we put in another to go out to the West Coast. And then I started looking at this thing, and I started saying to myself, could we create an alternative fuel corridor? Could this just become an alternative fuel corridor? Because in our tribal communities, we have a lot of, the roads are our biggest that's our lifeline. And, could we create an alternative fuel corridor out of this? So that's the next thing I'm going to ask this administration. Can I do this on a fuel corridor? But then what I want to do is, because I have a company called Solar Bear. What I do is I build solar projects too. And I thought to myself, can I put solar projects all up around this thing and create a transmission line and interconnect so I could decarbonize the grid and decarbonize the transportation system all at the same time? Blew everybody's mind. We're like, "Dude, could we do that?" I said, "Germany's doing it. China's doing it. Here in the United States, we need to dream big again. We need to start thinking big again." And I said, "Absolutely, I believe we could do it." So put together another little white paper. I'm giving it to those guys again. We'll see what they say, But I think it's all that culminated from all this, that this happened. Workforce development now is taking place. We're training folks in tribal communities to start learning how to repair electric vehicles. We delivered over $1 million in electric vehicles from this grant to these tribal communities, school buses, trucks, vehicles. It makes my heart so happy when I go to my tribe and my tribal reservation and I see the electric vehicle stations being used, and that one of the elders asked me, "Bob, why is it so important that we do this?" And I said, because he said, the federal government, the white man, didn't include us in anything, didn't want nothing to do with us. It's their problem. They should fix it. And I said, "You are correct." I said, "But the responsibility of Turtle Island, which we call United States of America, has always been indigenous people's responsibility and will always be our responsibility when everybody leaves. So it's our responsibility to take care of this place." Everybody got quiet. "Okay, Bob, we're in." And so, that was some of the cool things that came out of this. And now the tribe is really looking at okay, Bob, how are you connecting the microgrids with your electrification plan, with your community solar project, with this whole concept of net zeroing out the community, with EVs being able to supply battery and to the grid when, say, you need power over at the high school basketball game from homes that are parked a mile down the road, And I work with a a company called OATI that does all that management system stuff, right? So, you know, they have really gone down, you know, a rabbit hole with me on all this, but, you know, I just want to say to all of them that they have really been very supportive. And I think that's one of the things that you need as you're going on your entrepreneurial journey is you really need that support and folks that believed in you. Incidentally, when I first started this, and I did the presentation, I did everything to present to the tribal council. My cousin, who was the treasurer, laughed at me, or the secretary, he laughed, and a couple other folks kind of laughed, and that was very nerve-wracking for me, everyone. But one of the hereditary chiefs stood up and said, "Hey, Bob is speaking from the heart. Let's listen to him." And it was just that little like push that I needed, and I've been going ever since. So, you know, my point being though is just that, you know, as you're working and you're going down through these entrepreneurial avenues, you're going to get a lot of folks that are going to tell you no. I just firmly believe in trying to save this planet, you know, and which is why, you know, I believe that everything that I have been doing and the outreach into the communities and getting them to come along on this journey, because trust me, it's not easy getting 52 tribes to come along with you on the journey. That is very difficult to do. And everybody has their opinions, you know, in each and one of these communities, and they're valid. People are scared, everyone, you know, and I get it, you know. But the main point is, though, is that, you know, by us not doing anything, we're not gonna, I just can't sit here and not do anything. You know what I mean? So that's really how a lot of this began. Let me go to the next one here. We've done so many community events, dealership trainings, ride and drives. We do first responder trainings too, because a lot of this battery stuff right here, you know, especially in the vehicles, you know, they need to be, there's a way that you got to handle them, you know, and so educating the community, you know, on that. I come from my family is a bunch of Minneapolis cops, so I was supposed to be a cop, by the way, but all my family is a bunch of Minneapolis cops, so you know, they appreciate all this stuff that I'm talking about in the training. But here's just a list of some of the vehicles that we deployed into the communities. It's just really exciting because the vehicles, the programs that got these vehicles are like the elders program that has to deliver meals to all the elders on the reservation. And the fuel savings cost of that is going back into the program, right? And the Boys and Girls Club, they're going to put the savings they're getting from their fuel costs into new uniforms for the kids for the basketball team. It's stuff like that, right? Then I hear this stuff, and I'm just like, man, this stuff is all worth it, you know? Here's the DC fast charging units that we're putting in tribal communities, 60 level 2. We did have some trainings with the tribal community members too, where they were actually, you know, I straight up, I went out and got them, and I'm like, dude, we're gonna dig this trench, you know, and that's exactly what we did. We dug the trench. Incidentally, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that in some of the community events that we did, we hired some aunties. We call them aunties, older Native women in the community who made Indian tacos. So if any of you are wanting to do some research or doing outreach into the Native community, y'all need to have some Indian tacos, okay? And you need to hire aunties. And by the way, I gave the DOE and the DOT hell about not being able to let me spend money on paying Indians. I said, it was like, well, you know, if we do let it go here, you know, and we got to think about terrorism. I said, listen, we've got Native American older women that just are going to make some Indian tacos and go spend the money at the bingo hall. I was like, I think that's the last of our worries. That's not a national security issue. But anyways, I had a foundation come in and throw me some money, and so that's what I was using to pay the aunties, you know, to give them a little extra too for their bingo, because that's what they want to do. But it was those kinds of things that I did. Mayor Carter, they put me by the runner. Jacob Fry is the mayor of Minneapolis, and he's a marathon runner. And I'm like, dude, why you always got to put the big guy next to the skinny guy, you know? Anyways, we had Secretary Granholm in Minneapolis, and by the way, I got a great picture of Secretary Granholm at the bar with me. She is a really cool person, down to earth, and incidentally, the guy sitting next to Secretary Granholm had no idea had no idea that that was Secretary Granholm. But anyways, she was really cool. She hung out, she got some lunch with us, and she took off. But that was pretty awesome. But one of the great things, though, about all this really has just been just how this is spread throughout the country. I've had calls from tribal nations all across the country on this. And then it goes into the other things that I'm talking about, transmission. And then they want to talk to me about like microgrids, and then they want to talk to me about community solar. Then they want to talk to me about energy justice, and then they want to talk to me about, they do want to talk to me about mining. They do talk to me about all these other hard issues. And, and I explain to them, I know too much. I don't want to know all this. I want to go back to that guy that's just out there walking around, because I don't know, I know way too much. And what I do know is if we don't act right now, and we don't use this technology that we have and deploy it as quickly as possible, we're looking at a very terrible future, and especially for our kids and grandchildren, And so those are the things that I explain to them, Right now, they'll say, Bob, are you gonna electric vehicle and solar panel your way out of this mess? And I say, no, but I'm gonna buy time. I need to buy time. I need to buy time for that kid, for that Einstein, for that Tesla that hasn't been born yet or is in school right now, so he can figure this out for us, And so, a lot of the stuff that I've been doing, has been directly related to this, to the programs, to the solar, to the electric vehicles. Hence, now we got the Solar Cup program, which is an education program for K-12, and we just got money from NOAA to do the curriculum for all this stuff. But it's basically the solar bear family comes down from the North Pole to a Native American village, and they meet the clan animals, and then the little Native American girl comes in, and she's helping. So, anyways, long story short, all that is happening, and the kids, and I guess I want to end on this is that the kids came into the tribal council office and they wanted to meet Solar Bear. They said, Bob Lake isn't here. And they said, we don't want to meet Bob Lake. We want to meet Solar Bear. and then the chairman told me about this, and that's when I started thinking about this, and I thought to myself, and I asked the tribal council, it wouldn't be right, you guys, if we didn't bring the kids along for the journey. So that's how all this began, and so I'm really excited about that, to have the kids be involved in all this. So, Miigwech, and thank you.
Now let's hear from Dr. Shelly Francis, who's co-founder and managing partner of Eden Noir. I'm an academic, so I have to mention. Yes. Shelly was an academic.
I was an academic. Yes, I was at Case Western Reserve School of Medicine and then the Ohio State University, as they like to say. Thank you so much. So wonderful to be here with everyone today. So wonderful for the invitation from the UIC planning team. So I am an accidental entrepreneur is what I like to call myself. And so I was asked to talk about the importance around entrepreneurship and startups in this particular space. So I will go ahead and get started, but just to kind of give you a little background, if you don't know my team or my work, is that I was a former medical school professor that was specializing in environmental public health disparities. So I was doing a lot of work around maternal and child health and looking at health equity, as well as looking at different frameworks and models to facilitate research. Really important in my work as an academic, but now as an entrepreneur and co-founder, we approach our work in terms of looking at it from the vantage point of the client as well as community partners. So we say we help partners solve complex problems, and part of that is using a data-driven approach that is centered in community and or with the key stakeholders so that we can really understand what are some of those key strategies and pain points that we can utilize to create effective, sustainable strategies. All right, so I usually use a Mac, so let's see what's happening here. Okay, here it is. So for, just to give you a little bit of background, so we work on electric connected shared and autonomous mobility solutions. We're a consultancy, we're a technology-focused consultancy, and so our clients range from everyone from utilities and co-ops to transit authorities to working with rideshare and delivery network companies, government entities, so we work with the 25 largest cities, helping them craft their electrification strategies. And then we also work with smaller cities as well. And then some of these other partners that we have here, like community-based organizations and nonprofit. And the idea is that we're working with them to help them decarbonize their transportation strategy. So we're utilizing technology, data-driven approaches, working with community partners, really infusing their perspectives around what's going to work best for their specific transportation and mobility needs. And the idea is that we want to transition them to like greener mobility for, just a cleaner, greener future for everyone. This is just a snapshot of some of our team members. For us, it's really important that our team is reflective of the different communities and the different partners that we serve. So we try to make sure that our team is reflecting that vision. And then this is just a snapshot of some of the partners that we work with that I mentioned broadly. So we're working with, again, government. We've been working with both the Department of Energy, the Joint Office, the EPA, as well as the White House on their transportation electrification strategy, as well as the Justice 40 work. So why is this work really important? And so for us, it's important because obviously we're addressing transportation burden and opportunities. We look at this work from a public health lens, and I would be remiss if I didn't do that because my background is around public health and research. And so all of you, I'm sure, are quite aware of the significant burden that transportation has on diverse communities, particularly Black and brown communities. They're disproportionately affected by transportation emissions, and there's a huge historical context that I could do a whole nother presentation on in terms of how structural inequalities and policies have currently impacted how our transportation system and neighborhoods and residential segregation, how all of that is tied into how we see mobility impacting communities today. So some of the benefits, of course, of accelerating to cleaner transportation is obviously financial savings. Workforce and economic development opportunities are created by this transition, but we want to make sure that these opportunities are distributed to all of those communities, particularly those that are disproportionately impacted. Why equity is important in e-mobility is for a number of reasons. One, I just talked about the public health implications. So obviously, in this space, we know that emissions related from cars, buses, trucks, et cetera, are driving the air pollution that we see today. There's also a lot of environmental issues in terms of when you make this transition, obviously there's no perfect, there's no zero proof transition. There are, however, as we know, 50% fewer carbon dioxide emissions when we're utilizing clean transportation. So there's a lot of environmental and public health benefits for making this transition and shift. And in terms of economic development, there's definitely opportunity in terms of creating more jobs, creating stable incomes for a lot of different communities. And one of the things that we know, depending on which report you're reading, the Economist says one thing, other reports say something different. But there are going to be more jobs created around transportation electrification and the ancillary manufacturing businesses that are, aligned with this this whole system. There are going to be more jobs than we have people to, work in those jobs. So we have to do our work now to help really exposing folks from K through 12 into university, trade technical schools, et cetera, to the career opportunities within transportation electrification. So I flagged that I said this is a whole nother presentation, but the historical perspectives and implications around transportation are really important to conversations around e-mobility. So for us, I usually say, you can't talk about transportation electrification without talking about the historical consequences, inequities that we've seen. And a lot of the inequities have, surrounded mobility, movement, transportation. So from starting with Plessy versus Ferguson, which made transportation segregated, that the Supreme Court mandated that transportation needed to be separate but equal in 1896. Moving forward into the Civil Rights era with Rosa Parks and other stakeholders protesting about this very unequal transportation policy, Montgomery bus boycotts, John Lewis Freedom Riders, and even today when in the last 5-10 years driving while being a person of color and getting stopped. So there's a lot of things around transportation and mobility that are perpetuating inequities. When you start looking at the intersection of public health and equity, and I borrow this some of this mapping from Dr. Robert Buller, who's known as the father of the environmental justice movement. But when you start looking at the communities that are disproportionately impacted by air pollution, you can see generally it's geared to major metropolitan areas, the southeast, the southwest, the northeast, mid-Atlantic, all the darker spots are the worst areas. And then when you overlay the map of where the most racially diverse communities are, there's a direct correlation between what we're seeing around the worst air pollution and where diverse communities and stakeholders live. So again, it's really important in terms of being an entrepreneur and working in this space that part of our work, while we are working around e-mobility best practices and focus on multimodal electrification, we can't do the work that we do without thinking about how it's impacting diverse communities and how we can be more inclusive. For us, diversity isn't just on this diversity, it's thinking about LGBTQ plus communities, it's thinking about the role of women, it's retirees, it's rural versus urban. So it's really thinking about accessibility and more things than just multicultural issues. So for us, the diversity, equity, inclusion is a wider umbrella. It's very important for us in the work that we do to bring these issues and best practices and different frameworks and hear about what's working all across the country to our partners and to people like you in this very room. So we created a national conversation called the National E-Mobility Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Conference, and it's usually a hybrid conference. The first day is usually virtual so that we can really open it up to a wider audience and be more inclusive. And then the second day is usually in person. And so it's an annual conference that we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. This was our last conference. So we try to bring in experts from community, government, business, the gamut across the transportation electrification sector. And for us, one of the things that's also really important is making sure that there's youth voice in our work and in a forum like this. So we make sure that our young people are given the opportunity to talk about what are some of the issues that they're concerned about and utilize some of their thought leadership to help us think about these issues from a different lens. Another thought leadership or piece that we do, again, is creating this interest and this drumbeat around career opportunities in the e-mobility space. So we developed Women in E-Mobility series, and that's one of my favorite things. So most recently, we had Commissioner Patty Monahan be one of our guests on it's a digital series, and the idea is we want to expose more people to career opportunities in this space, and then show young people particularly, as well as people who want to come from maybe other fields, that there's a space and place for women all across the electrification sector. So whether you're in manufacturing or vehicle design or policy, there's a space and place for you. So we're trying to just show different thought leaders who are working in the space. We've also created, from just being steeped in the work and being in the space, is another organization. So a double entrepreneur, accidental entrepreneur. So EV Hybrid Noir is our 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to equitably accelerate multimodal clean transportation. And so the idea is that it's also a membership organization. And you might say, well, what does that mean? So what that means is that we are a network. So we're the nation's largest network of diverse EV drivers and enthusiasts. So we have thousands of Black and brown EV owners and enthusiasts from across the globe: Canada, US, Asia, Europe, the Caribbean, the continent of Africa. And so we have folks who are living and breathing and driving EVs from all different price points, from the $5,000 EV that maybe gets 30 to 40 miles range now, to the Cybertruck. So the idea behind having that space is that when I became an EV owner almost 10 years ago, I started off with a Nissan Leaf, and I was just looking for community to talk about, what do I do? How do I navigate? Where to charge? All that kind of stuff. And then I wanted to really just share like my excitement and enthusiasm about being an EV owner and what I was learning with other folks who were reflective of my community or who I knew could benefit from it, and there was none. There was nothing. So in talking to other folks, a gentleman who's a Black EV owner, we're like, we should start our own space and like just, create a safe space so we can talk about this and share it with people. And we laughed about it. And so we just kept running into each other and talking about it. And then we decided like, okay, let's do it. And there was 5 of us. He had 2 Facebook, logins, and I had 1. And so the group started with the 3 of us and a couple allies. And so now it's grown to, like I said, this community of thousands of people. And the idea is that we want to create this space where all communities can, experience clean air, breathe clean air. They can learn about electrification in a way that's culturally relevant and exciting and engaging, and they understand how the benefits can impact them. So what EV Hybrid Noir does is that we're an advocacy organization. We do decision maker education. We're doing very light lobbying, but education of legislators and those key decision makers. We do a lot of media outreach, a lot of research around knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs around electrification. So barriers, opportunities, how can we get more people engaged? Like, how do people want to be engaged around this issue? It's not a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of, gaining different audiences' interest around this issue. We also know that workforce and economic development is really important. So people want to know, like, there's billions of dollars of federal investment around electrification. Life-changing money for many communities. Obviously, Robert, you talked about how impactful this opportunity and this time where we are has been for your community. And so one of the things that we saw in terms of just exposing more people to career opportunities is that we needed to create a pipeline because we are working with OEMs and they're always saying like, well, we can't find, talent. So we're like, okay, we're going to help groom talent. And so our e-mobility fellowship targets people from trade and technical schools, from community colleges, from historically Black colleges and universities, from tribal and indigenous community schools. Gosh, that 5 minutes goes by quickly. So the idea is like we're getting folks who are not normally represented in this conversation, training them, taking them through a 1-year curriculum, and then placing them in internships in the summertime. They get stipends, both the faculty advisors and the students that we work with, they get stipends to help, defray the cost of their being part of this. So this is just a highlight of our network. And then we also co-founded a global network of EV enthusiasts, which represents about 70 countries. So we're doing things with like Finland and Norway and other countries that have been leaders in the electrification space. This is just a quick highlight of our fellowship. We are working with 12 schools right now. We're expanding to 16 for this coming cohort year, and there are a couple in the pipeline who we think will join us by the fall. Thought leadership is really important. I mentioned we do a lot of research in this space across both organizations. And so these are just some examples of our research we've done. This last one on the right, the federal NEVI project, we did that evaluating about half of the NEVI projects in the United States. We've done medium heavy duty electrification, as well as recently we did a project with Union of Concerned Scientists, Consumer Reports, Green Latinos, and we looked at knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs around electrification and found that Black, Hispanic stakeholders are more interested in transitioning to electric vehicles than other communities. So very unusual for some people, but we were like, we've seen this for years. That's why we've been talking about some of the things that we've been talking about. So anyway, the idea is that if you have an idea about solving a complex problem, it can turn into a business. And so that is essentially how I and others on my team got started in this space, from having the idea that wanting to solve an issue or a challenge that we saw in the community. There's an opportunity for you to build out your idea and use something that you're really passionate about to make the to make something better for other people. So whether it's around mobility and transportation or some other area that you're passionate about, I would definitely say tap into your inner entrepreneur and, give that idea some life, and you may end up here talking about, your idea at some point. But anyway, thank you for your time. I know I'm getting the gong now. And so do we have time for questions, or do we do questions at the end, or what would you like to do?
We'll do questions.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Third panelist is Edith Maka, the Director of Environmental Initiatives at the Metropolitan Mayor's Office. So I've gotten to know Edith over the last year or so, and I can tell you she works tirelessly for our communities and is one of the heroes in Illinois. So Edith, look forward to it.
Thank you so much for having me here. When I first got invited to be part of the Startups and Innovation panel, I was a little bit confused, and then I'm going to lean into it because you don't probably think that local governments are highly innovative and creative. So that's what I'm here to challenge you on, and then I want to talk about some of the initiatives that we're working at. First off, the Chicago metropolitan region is represented by the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. So we're a not-for-profit regional council of governments. We represent 275 municipalities in northeastern Illinois. We were originally founded by Mayor Daley, then Mayor of Chicago, to foster cooperation across the region. We're a tiny staff, and I run the environment program. So we're not just an environmental organization, but we do a lot of cool and innovative things in that space. So the foundation for organizing around sustainability and sustainable transportation comes from these two documents. So everybody's telling origin stories, and I just want to tell the Greenest Region Compact. I wasn't going to take the time for this, but when I first got to the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, I was overwhelmed by the diversity of thought and the opportunity that I had to influence 275 municipalities, but we didn't have any focus in terms of what. So the Greenest Region Compact was my way of organizing all of the initiatives. My husband jokingly calls me the organizer because I like things in order. So there's a lot of spreadsheets, but it got us all focused in the right direction. So Greenest Region Compact, it exists in three parts. First, we got everybody, all the municipalities around a set of consensus goals, which includes sustainable mobility, which is, again, why I'm here. So there's high-level goals for municipal sustainability, and it exists on just 2 pages because I work for mayors, right? This is a kind of a political foundation for it. We created, for those who want more detail and then how to do something with it, we created the Greenest Region Compact Framework, which is a lot of spreadsheets that helps staff and sustainability directors and municipal leaders create their own sustainability plan and focus. And then the funnest part for me is collaborative action. So we work together. I work at the regional level, and it is my job to find funding, partnerships, resources, to work together towards these Greenest Region Compact goals. And then proudly, the Greenest Region Compact was a good idea, that it is now the largest regional sustainability collaborative for municipalities in the country. So we have everything from the community of Burlington at 684 residents to the city of Chicago, all supportive of the same goals. So great foundation for moving forward. In 2017, when then President pulled out of the Paris Agreement in the US, was an embarrassment to the world. There was more pressure and more communication to subnationals, including local governments, to get busy on climate. So why are we waiting for the federal government? Let's get going. So it was at that time I started advocating for a climate action plan to take our Greenest Region Compact network and framework and all that momentum, that political momentum we had, and focus it on climate. So the difference between these two is that there's targets related to greenhouse gas emissions. It's got mitigation, adaptation, and equity baked into the climate action plan for the Chicago region. It was the first regional climate action plan for the Chicago area. It's only the third in the US, and we were mentored by the European Union. Most of the climate planning in the US was really focused on the big cities, and again, I have this network of small communities inclusive of Chicago, but we were being overlooked for planning resources, and the European Union took us on, and through this partnership with the Global Covenant of Mayors, mentored the Chicago region as one of 3 regional climate plans. And those of you who know what climate pollution reduction grants are, US EPA's largest investment in climate ever, they use the regional approach for climate planning. So there are now 81 regional climate plans in the US. Moving into details then on now how we connect to sustainable transportation and equitable transportation. So I'm going to just pull out a little bit on the climate action plan on climate mitigation. And most of you probably know this, but this is a wedge graph. And what we do to create a climate action plan, start with baseline. So this is our greenhouse gas emissions in 2015, and we want to get to net zero in 2050. Through modeling, we look at these different solutions, which are the different colors of the wedges, there on how we get to, we can't actually get to net zero. If you're astute, you'll notice we get to about 83% reduction, which is what we modeled. So looking in at two of our objectives on the climate action plan related to transportation, and one of them is decarbonized transportation, and the other is reduce vehicle miles traveled. So burn cleaner fuels, get out of cars. Those are the two objectives. And then how we move forward, and this is the innovative part, we have to make it very simple for local governments, but if you look at leveraging our unique strengths and authorities as local governments, it kind of comes down to this. So how can municipalities be effective? We can lead by doing. Our own operations be supportive of climate mitigation and adaptation and equity. We can encourage others, including our own constituents, other levels of government, partners, vendors, to take climate action. And then the one you probably thought of first is enact codes and policies supportive of climate action. And again, this carries through to all of our transportation work as well. So then the objective around reducing vehicle miles traveled, one of the strategies in the plan is design roadways for all users and promote active transportation. So this makes sense to local governments when you talk about climate action in this way, because this is something they know how to do. And then when we took inventory of what's actually happening, this is good work done by the Metropolitan Planning Council, focusing in on climate action and transportation. They inventoried how many municipalities in the Chicago region have a complete streets policy. And again, this group probably knows what it is, but it is a formal statement of policy through ordinance or resolution or in planning that says we're going to make roadways safe and accessible for all. We found there's 1,500 municipalities in the U.S. that have complete streets, and not a bad showing for the Chicago region to have the complete streets policies. But again, leading and enacting are the two levers that we're doing here. This is one of my favorites. So talking with Selva about what do I know about transportation, I love this in terms of equity and sustainability. So, active transportation, we want people to be using transit systems, but how do you get there? So the strategy here is to build and maintain safe, resilient, active transportation infrastructure. And we have a transit system. So we have a transit system that covers much of the Chicago metro region. And in the suburbs, it's the PACE bus system. But this sidewalk inventory maps out where's the lack of sidewalks to get to the bus stop. So you can read that for yourself. But the sidewalk completeness within a half mile of each PACE bus stop, red means there's no sidewalks. And there's what that looks like. So if you live in that multifamily building, how do you get across the street in good weather? How do you get across the street if you don't walk well or have any other kind of a disability? And how do you do that in the wintertime when there's no sidewalk there? So it's these kinds of, data-driven, this maps out where the problems are. So, local governments do build sidewalks, and it's really nice knowing how do you prioritize investments so that you can make the transportation system equitable and sustainable. Project Sidewalk, I was very pleased that they're exhibiting here. This is, again, not our program, but we love this because it dovetails with what local governments can do. And in a nutshell, please go visit them. But this is a project, you can see UIC is involved in this National Science Foundation Smart and Connected Cities Communities grant. And the idea is crowdsourcing where the barriers are to safe, accessible, resilient, active transportation infrastructure. And so this crowdsourcing as a volunteer, and municipalities can recruit volunteers. There's another map I don't have time to show, bicycle and pedestrian commissions in the suburban regions. So these are volunteer groups that are advocates for active transportation. Give them the tablet, give them the training, they can go out and inventory where there are physical barriers to being able to use the sidewalk that makes it safe and accessible for all. And so again, with the database of where are these barriers, you can take action. So this is a really nifty program that municipalities can partner with and dovetail. And this one's corny, but indulge me here, because I think this is really, and if you'll notice this, my favorite one in terms of icons is leadership. So before you say, this is, I don't know, what can municipalities do? Mayors are public figures. And then when you get to smaller communities, they're of the community. These are people who volunteer their time, usually, to lead their cities, literally. And in this case, this was a challenge. This actually is a health program. This came out of the National Institute or National Association of Stroke and Heart Disease Prevention. And they coined this program called Move with the Mayor. And our leading mayor in the Chicago area doing this as a pioneer was Mayor Ruben Pineda of West Chicago. And if you don't know West Chicago, it's not a western portion of the city. There's former Superfund sites in West Chicago. So it is an environmental justice community, primarily Latino community in the far west suburbs. And there was a health equity issue. So in terms of access to diet and mobility, and Mayor Pineda, wanting to lose a few pounds himself, got involved in leading these community walks, and that's what the challenge is. So the Move with the Mayor program challenges the mayors to step into the leadership role, invite community members to go on walks if you can walk. Some of the mayors have had walking meetings. Many of them, they're doing bike rides, they're doing yoga. The idea is, again, health-driven, but when you think of this from a climate and equity standpoint, these are people who may not be normally walking around their neighborhoods, getting to know each other. You're building community. You're creating a sense of safety and awareness of your neighborhood, and you're showing them where they can walk easily and safely around the neighborhood. So I call this climate action. Really proud, again, I got to brag about my mayors, but a couple of years ago, during the pandemic, Illinois, when I pushed my mayors to do this, we led in most mayors participating in the country. So. And I'm going to switch gears to the next objective, which is, we've talked a lot about it, and thank you for the great presentations here, on decarbonizing transportation. So for local governments, our role here, we always look at what we can do and do well. And what we can do and do well is sometimes get out of the way, and we know that, right? But for any EV charger to be installed in a community, you have to get a permit from local government, right? So what can we do to make sure that it goes quickly, equitably, safely, and quickly, and that reduces costs? So we built on this program that wasn't, again, the first program wasn't our program, it was called SolSmart, which said for solar development, let's make it faster, easier, and cheaper to go solar. And we did really well with that in the Chicago region. Again, we were #1 in the country. And the municipalities didn't have to spend money, and they just learned how to make their policies streamlined. One community in Schaumburg became a SolSmart, and they had a 24,500% increase in the number of solar panels. So this was, you're all talking about your great ideas, this was my idea, the EV Readiness Program, and I'm like, we should do this for EVs. And so this program is new. This is our first cohort that finished as the first EV-ready communities in the country to streamline codes and policies to make it easier for EV charging and EV adoption. So what we do is we created a checklist of actions that go anywhere from how to prioritize multifamily dwellings, how to connect last mile, how to create permits that make sense and are streamlined and contemporary, and then we also have that leadership with electrifying public fleets and then publicly accessible charging. Fun program there. And then to switch real quickly to adaptation. In the plan, and I don't have the pretty pictures here, but I wanted to show you just a page from the plan to show you how embedded equity is in all aspects of the plan, but I'm highlighting the transportation components here. So here is the columns are our primary climate hazards in northeastern Illinois, and transportation is again highlighted here. But then if you look at the equity and inclusion for local governments, what does it mean? It means a lot of things, but making sure that your vulnerable populations are included in planning and that they're prioritizing investments for them. This is what we're seeing with Justice 40, making sure to communicate in a way that all of your populations understand information, assuring transit routes and serving vulnerable populations are accessible during extreme weather events. That's the bus stop scene that we looked at. A little bit here on promoting transit-oriented development and connected neighborhoods, again, building that sense of cohesion, but land use plans that, again, are the responsibility of local governments. So with that, thank you for having me. I look forward to being part of the panel.
Yes, Yeah, so you probably realize by now, one of the things we're trying to do in this workshop is being a nexus between different areas. And so you've heard from communities to, entrepreneurs to local governments. And so sort of pushing that further is our last speaker and panelist, Madeline Zhu, who's a policy advisor in the Smart Grants program at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Madeline.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. As Robert pointed out, I am the Fed in the room, but it's okay. And we all have favorite ones, don't worry. Yes, so I am going to talk a bit about the Smart Grants program, and that's going to involve a little bit of gear shifting, which I'll explain as we go. But first, I actually want to introduce myself a bit because I am also here wearing two hats. So my day job is I am a policy advisor for the Smart Grants program. You're going to hear all about what that is and why it's relevant. But actually, I think one of the reasons why I was invited to speak here is also because of my background building and leading technology startups in the transportation space. So for the 10 years prior to my joining US DOT, I held senior business roles at a series of tech startups that either went to Series A or Series B funding. And I'm not going to talk too much about those companies in my slides, but if you want to ask questions about them, I'm more than happy to. And those companies worked in the spaces of digital infrastructure, micro and shared mobility, transit operations software, and I also worked a lot on transportation data and real-time engagement around informal transportation systems in Africa and Latin America. So all of that background in technology and entrepreneurialism and working in the innovation space, particularly where that innovation lands with local government in the transportation network, is what brought me to SMART. So SMART, is, like all good government programs, is an acronym. It is the Strengthening Mobility and Revolutionizing Transportation Grant. And this is a grant program that was newly created a few years ago in the bipartisan infrastructure law, along with many, many others. We've heard a lot in our panelists already about the role that federal funding and grant programs can have on all different kinds of initiatives and ideas. I think we've heard over a dozen different grant programs rattled off. But ours is focused on transportation demonstration projects. It's $500 million over 5 years. I will give a plug. Our opportunity for funding is currently open, so you have 55 more days to apply for it if you are interested. But the entities that we fund are public entities, state or political subdivisions, tribal governments, public transit agencies, toll authorities, that sort of thing. Now, that doesn't mean that those are the grantees, but as we'll talk about more, every good grant is a large team of many, many partners involving community organizations, research institutions, private sector companies, consultants, other government agencies, anybody else you can think of to partner with in the course of delivering your project. And these SMART projects fund demonstration projects, like I said. Every project should address a real-world challenge. We focus on purpose-driven innovation, which means that we look for technology that solves a problem, not technology for the sake of technology. And we're very interested in building local technology capacity. So that, again, means whatever is innovation, whatever is capacity stretching for your institution. For the city of Chicago might have a lot more experience and capacity rolling out high-tech programs compared to a small municipality just on the outskirts, but maybe still in the caucus, right? So what looks like technology capacity in different places can vary. We focus on 8 different technology areas. We've heard a lot today, especially in this panel, about electrification. Electrification is an essential component of the decarbonization and sustainability of our transportation system. It, however, is not sufficient all alone, and it is intersectional with many other elements of transportation. So our technology areas look across all modes of transportation. We fund projects in aviation. We fund projects that are on land, both transit, rail, vehicular, all different kinds of things like that. We don't have any current projects that are maritime, but there's no reason you couldn't have a maritime project. We work with ports. We do cross-border commerce, all kinds of things. And a lot of the work that we're focused on, and a lot of the work where my background is in using different forms of intelligent transportation systems, we call it, to make things smarter, more optimized, more efficient, more accessible, and more interoperable. So a lot of this is kind of the background software magic that makes it easier for you to plan a trip that involves a bike and a bus and a shared vehicle, right? Or to find those pieces of infrastructure in the first place if perhaps you are vision impaired, or the kind of infrastructure that enables a technology that triggers your traffic signals to be more efficient, which actually can add up to really significant savings in both travel times and vehicular emissions. You think about idling at red lights, that sort of thing. Every little bit helps there, and there's a lot of ways you can roll out interesting and innovative technologies to help improve that. So I'm in deep agreement with Edith. It is possible for both local and federal governments to do interesting and innovative things, but you can only do them when you have local communities that really understand what their challenge is and have a really good grasp of how they want to try to solve that. So in the last 2 years that SMART has been in existence, we have funded 93 projects at $148 million. This is just a map of where all the projects are. There's a couple of important things to point out here. The first is that 30% of our funds are legislatively reserved for rural areas, 40% are reserved for what we call large communities, which is basically urban areas, and then the remaining 30 are for mid-sized communities, which is everybody in between. We fund a number of projects currently in partnership with tribal governments, either they're the grantees themselves or ones where they've partnered with other local agencies, and we have projects all across the country. We have 39 states plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. And these are really diverse projects. The project in Alaska is a partnership with over 30 rural Native Alaskan villages to use thermal sensing from drones to evaluate the level of melt on ice roads, because there are no roads in this part of Western Alaska and people drive on frozen rivers and every year they fall through and die. But if you can fly remotely operated drones over the river and scan them thermally, you can find out where the ice is thin, and it's exactly the same as going on the IDOT map and seeing where there's work zones on the freeway. So that's an example of a project, right? I had an immense pleasure of working with that team last month. But there is also a project that we just started here in Chicago with the CTA that's looking at something called queue jumps, which is one way of giving the bus priority at the intersection so that when it is at a near-side bus stop picking up passengers and the light turns green, it's really hard for a bus to merge back in because traffic is already moving. It's a safety risk. It makes life harder for bus operators. Did you know there's a nationwide massive shortage of bus operators? And so if you give them priority at the intersection, they can jump the queue and they can pull up ahead of the cars, right? So these are two super different projects, both of which contribute to the equity and sustainability of our transportation system. The other thing that I wanted to say about the map is that we use a very strong Justice 40 lens for all of our projects. We are what's called a covered project, which means we have to consider Justice 40 in all of our evaluation and selection process. So in all of the grants that we made last year, every single one was in a project location that's considered a highly disadvantaged community. That's what HDC stands for. And so that's something that's a really important part of our project as well. So I talked about purpose-driven innovation. We encourage all of our grantees to start with the problem. Like I said, that really does mean understanding what are you trying to do, what are you trying to solve, not just to have technology for the sake of technology. But that means everything from things like work zones and cycling paths in urban communities, connected vehicle technologies, pedestrian detection and protection. We also work with freight, we work with long-haul trucking, we work with cross-border commerce. So everything is basically included under SMART. And the last thing that I want to talk about are some of the themes of the more recent cohort that I think specifically speak to some of the themes of the conference. So the first is transit innovation. I mentioned our CTA project. We have a lot of different transit projects. You can find the full lists and really cool interactive maps and all kinds of information about this project at our website. If you just Google DOT SMART, you will find us. But some of the other ones here that I wanted to talk about are things like safety at rail crossings. We have a number of projects that are looking at what is called track intrusion detection, which is people and things near the train track, and various safety systems for automatically slowing down trains, triggering barriers, things like that to protect people who are near the train tracks. But conversely, we also have projects that are trying to optimize the time that the crossing is closed, because right now a lot of those detectors are pretty rudimentary. If your train crossing is down for a lot longer than necessary and people can see that there's no train, people start to go anyway. They start to climb under the barriers or try to drive around them, and that's incredibly dangerous. But it also is a huge loss of time for everybody. It can cut off communities. We have a lot of communities where rail goes straight through them, between kids and their schools, people and the hospital. We don't want those barriers to be down any longer than they need to be. So those are kind of two sides of the same kind of problem. Another area that we are really focused on is access. So I was talking about the sort of invisible back-end software solutions. A lot of the ones that we have funded are focused on working with communities that are trying to access transportation from either some other place of accessibility or disability. So that could be wayfinding, either in a station, making it easier for folks who are visually impaired to navigate a train station in New York or in San Francisco, or making information about essential facilities available. So you can go into Google Maps and you can see where a bus stop is. That's enabled by an open source data standard that I could talk about forever. That's pretty cool and has been in place for about 15 years. But you can't look right now and see if the bus that's coming has an open wheelchair slot or not. And there's only 2 of those on most buses, so you might have to wait for the next bus if you need to use that. Same with bike racks. So we have a project in the Bay Area that's developing that data standard. We also have some projects that are working on paratransit. Paratransit is the complementary transportation system that all public transit systems have to provide for folks who have disabilities. But if you have ever used one of those, they are pretty terrible a lot of the time. You might have to book your ride up to 3 days in advance. Which means you're probably not going to use it, or wait for hours. And they're often run by a huge ecosystem of different kinds of small organizations who all have to bill and be reimbursed, and it's very difficult to scale them. It's very difficult to get incentives through them, and it's also very difficult then to even allow things like credits or subsidies or other ways of enabling and expanding that service. So we have some projects that are completely redoing the back-end systems for those services to make them smoother for both the people who ride and the people who provide them. And the last thing in the area of safety I want to talk about, safety is always the #1 priority of the department. We call it job 1. So obviously sustainability, very important, equity, very important, but safety above all things. And in SMART, one of the ways we think a lot about safety is at the traffic signal. So the intersection is one of the most contested and dangerous and important places, whether you are in an urban context or a rural context. And traffic signals are very common across the United States. They're one of our best tools for bringing change to these intersections. So whether we are putting priority at the intersection for an emergency vehicle so that it can more quickly reach folks in a rural area, if you get into an accident on a rural road, it is 1.7 times more likely to be fatal than if you get into an accident in an urban road, in part because it takes a long time for help to reach you. So we have some projects that are looking at giving signal priority and things like that, but also detecting pedestrians, detecting bicyclists. Something as simple as extending the walk sign when you know there's a pedestrian in the intersection, a person who's moving more slowly, a person who's carrying a lot of heavy stuff, a person with children, can be really, really impactful in saving those lives or giving information to the drivers of cars who are stopped at the light. So there are a lot of ways that technology can be used to make things safer and more equitable and more sustainable for everyone. And when you think about those goals, electrification is obviously really, really important, and shifting fuels in general, but there's all these other seemingly smaller ways that we can improve our system even without having to wait for the overarching transformation of our fuel economy. And I think that those things are very important to invest in right now. So the last thing that I want to talk about a little bit, just because we do have an open notice of funding opportunity, and I would be remiss if I didn't plug it a little bit, is thinking about the problem that you're trying to solve is obviously the best way to start with anything. First, thinking about what is the technology that will be an effective solution for your community. What works in one doesn't work in another, right? That the team in Alaska is using a very particular kind of remotely operated drone that frankly would be overkill almost anywhere else, but it makes a lot of sense for them. Will that technology address a known problem? Does it lead to significant improvements, right? Sometimes you can shave a couple seconds off here and there and it has a big impact. And sometimes it doesn't, and so maybe you could save that money for something else that would be more impactful, right? And especially thinking about what obstacles existed in the past to implementing technologies. I've talked almost exclusively about technology at this point, but something that is equally, if not more important to the success of these kinds of projects is community understanding and not just acceptance, but adoption, and thus the community engagement that you should be doing at all levels to really understand, is this the problem people want solved in their community? Is this problem occurring for the reasons we think it is? Is it having the impacts that we think it's having? And then will this solution actually be something that people will get excited about, be enthusiastic about, will they want to share with their children, versus something that maybe will not seem safe to them, or will not be protective of their privacy, or will not be, the part of the vision of the community that they want to live in. An important part of that community engagement then is about your partnerships. I mentioned every SMART grant, the funds go directly to a public agency, but that public agency is just the tip of the pyramid of all of the partners that are part of the grant. So all the different partnerships that could exist, we want to encourage, and those partnerships can help you do things on time. They can also help you reach partners, communities, people that you need to engage with that you wouldn't otherwise. They obviously sometimes are supplying your technology, helping with the technical components of the project. And for this audience, I particularly want to highlight the role of research and academic partners. Almost every SMART grant has academic partners for a couple of reasons. Sometimes the academic partners are the developers of the technology that they want to use, but often they are also the evaluators of the project. So they are the ones who help those agencies think about, how can we measure whether we are actually achieving the benefits that we hope we will or claimed we would in our application. How do we collect that data? How do we make sure that it is answering the right questions for us? And then from that, we will be able to derive the learnings from this project. So we're gonna have these hundreds of projects around the country, and all of that data will become part of our sort of overall understanding and resources that are available to anyone through the DOT's Smart Community Resource Center, which is a big online hub for all kinds of information that we have or that are generated through federal grants. So I want to say that although many of you in this audience might not be people who yourselves would apply for SMART grants, you probably have partners, you probably have projects in mind that you think could be good fits, particularly if you are working and living and breathing in the transportation space as much as I think most of you are. And so I'm happy to answer questions about SMART, also happy to answer questions about the life of tech entrepreneurship, and just want to again say thank you, all of you, so much.